How much time do we have?
30 minutes.
Oh.
You were elected lieutenant governor 4 times, right?
Yes.
Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We are most pleased to welcome you to our program, and we're so honored to have as our guest today United States Congressman C.L. Butch Otter, who serves the 1st Congressional District from the state of Idaho. Our guest has been with us on a number of other occasions, even in other capacities held in the past. Our congressman is serving his 2nd term at this time in the U.S. House of Representatives, and among other duties, he serves on the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. He's also vice chairman of the House Western Caucus. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science from the College of Idaho, now known as Albertsons College. Our guest also served in the Idaho House of Representatives, and he was elected Lieutenant Governor of Idaho 4 times, which is a historical record. The only person ever elected to 4 terms is our Lieutenant Governor. Congressman Butch Otter, it's always nice to see you, and thank you. You're always generous with your time, and we always love having you on our program.
Thank you, Tony. It's great to be here.
And I'm very pleased to have our 2 regular panelists with us today, Janelle Burke, who's an attorney in the state of Idaho, and I might add, graduated from the same college that our congressman did. And then next to her is Erna Reinhardt, Director of Public Relations with our college, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Congressman, we're pleased to have you here, and you're very generous with your time, as Tony noted. I know that there are many people out there who are concerned about the state of the economy. Idahoans in general are concerned, and also our neighboring states. Can you tell us what you consider to be the state of the economy in the U.S.?
Well, Janelle, in the United States, I think we've got an awful lot of very positive signs. Obviously, the stock market is probably the one that we watch on a day-to-day basis. But also the G2 money supply has suggested that there has been a lot of capital investment, especially over the last 6 to 8 months. I suspect a lot of that was due to some of the tax consequences, or I should say the tax bill that was passed early in the year, and given the companies an opportunity to reinvest their capital. So what has been really going on the last 8 months is the brick and mortar have been going together, the equipment's been going into the buildings, and as a result of that, now we'll have a job station, and so I suspect the job increase is going to follow. So I really think the economy is in great shape. I certainly hope it is. We're in Congress depending on that because of the amount of spending that we've been doing. We're about $480 billion overspent right now, and which would mean about a $2.15 trillion budget. So it's going to take a good, strong economy to get us out of that, and I think it's coming.
That was my next portion of the question, was as a businessman, of course, I'm sure you're very concerned always about debt. Mm-hmm. And what is your reading on the debt of the United States?
Well, like I said, we will be about $480 billion in debt after this year. A lot of that obviously can be attributed to hopefully one-time expenses, the war in Iraq, building up for the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, and putting together the Homeland Security piece. But there was a lot of one-time expenses for that, and so I certainly hope that we won't have to incur those expenses again. Certainly the $400 billion Medicare package, the pharmaceutical benefit on the Medicare package, is going to be a reoccurring expense, but that's obviously over 10 years. So we're looking, I believe, with the economic growth that we predict that we're going to have, we're probably looking at a balanced budget in about the next 5 or 6 years.
Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to North Idaho College, Congressman
Thank you,
Otter. It's great to have you here. One of the things that really changed our country was 9/11, and it has changed the way we traveled. It's changed the way we are viewed in the world. And I want to talk a little bit about the Patriot Act, because I know that you are very involved in that. Can you tell us a little bit about what the Patriot Act was intended to do, and then some of the things that you are doing to try to make some changes to that act?
Well, Ernie, you must remember the Patriot Act was actually passed 47 days after 9/11. The smoke was still coming up out of the rubble in the Twin Towers in New York City. the smoke was still coming up out of the Pentagon, right across from the nation's capital, across the Potomac. And we were still getting daily calls from families of the victims from either the Pentagon or the Twin Towers. And so it was a very tender time. At the same time, a lot of folks around the United States, everybody's constituency was saying, do something. We need to do something. And I think a lot of folks, when they voted on the Patriot Act, all but 67, felt that this was something that we were doing. We were going to show the world a face of solidarity, a face of commitment and firmness, that we weren't going to tolerate that kind of thing. And so we were going to use the permissions within the Patriot Act to seek out and find anybody who would conspire to create another act of terrorism in the United States. And it was an overreach. It was a terrible overreach. It was a violation of some of the most basic tenets of our form of government, not the least of which was the balance of power. The separation of and the systems of checks and balances. But the separation of powers was purposely accomplished by the Founding Fathers so that not one agency of government or not one person could ever decide what the law is, who violated the law, and what the penalty was for. So those responsibilities were divided up. The Congress erred terribly in passing the Patriot Act because what it basically did is it took away from the courts certain oversights into probable cause, into issuing search warrants, into being prepared to waive some of the most precious rights that we've got in the Bill of Rights and protections in the Constitution, in an effort to expedite the gathering up of any potential terrorist. And so my efforts now, the efforts of many of my colleagues in Congress, is to go back and repeal that errors that we made in the Patriot Act. Now, make no mistake, there are several things that are good in the Patriot Act. I believe the money laundering provisions of the Patriot Act to dry up the resource in this country that had been provided to terrorists so that they could acquire and had the necessary capital to organize those terrorist cells. So I agree with the money laundering provisions. I agree with tightening up our borders and the customs and some of the INS supports that we gave through the Patriot Act. But all of the powers that we gave to areas of government, to agencies of government, that in effect reduced our civil liberties are the ones that we're going to try to take back. And we have introduced in the House a bill called the SAFE Act, which is security and freedom insured. And it repeals some of the most egregious sections of the Patriot Act. Mike Simpson and I, and Mike Simpson and I, and about 50 or so of our colleagues have introduced it in the House. Larry Craig and Mike Crapo and quite a few of their colleagues in the Senate have introduced the same bill in the Senate.
Wonderful, thanks.
I'd like to follow up on this because it's something that you've become actually known nationwide for. I just have to say before asking my question that when this bill was introduced so quickly after this awful crime of September 11th, and the country was desperate to, obviously as it should be, to deal with terrorism, but it was enacted so quickly with these provisions. We want to analyze more of them, but you were really the leader, almost the lone wolf in relation to this. So my first question is, you're a person with lots of courage, and how did you deal with your colleagues and others? There couldn't have been a more difficult time for you to oppose some provisions of that act.
Well, as I said earlier, Tony, it was a very tender time because people were asking us to do something, and the families of the victims were. We had gone through and listened to many of the recordings, obviously from the Twin Towers, of folks that were calling their families saying the tower's on fire. We listened to the recordings of the folks on Flight 93 that went down and fell. The very first patriots in this war against terrorism. And so it was a tough time, but the Founding Fathers and many of those folks throughout history have told us that we must be careful about our system of government and the survival of this republic, because it's going to be during these periods of chaos and crises when we're going to be asked to lay our liberties at the feet of even a great man. in order to secure some security. But in the long run, if we're willing to do that, by and large, we're unworthy of freedom, and we're not likely long to enjoy it. And so there was myself and 2 other Republicans and 64 other members, 63 Democrats and 1 independent, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, who voted against the Patriot Act and warned of these times and reminded the folks of the times that our founding fathers had warned us. You had to be ever vigilant. And during these moments of heightened passion and concern was at the time that the Republic was most at peril.
Now, you mentioned answering Ernest's question about the SAFE Act. Let's go through for a minute and take some of the major provisions of the SAFE Act that would change the Patriot Act. Your bill does not repeal the Patriot Act, but changes it in some significant ways.
It repeals certain sections,
right.
And because we passed legislation to create law, that same body, the legislative branch of government, now must pass legislation to repeal that law. And so it would repeal the library provision, which would allow the law enforcement community to go in and seize the records in a library, seize any citizen's records that may have been reading or accessing through a computer some kind of a web page that could appear as though that they were involved in some sort of terrorist activity or terrorist research or how to make a homemade bomb or something like that. It would repeal that section. It would repeal the section on sneak and peek provisions where search warrants, where the law enforcement community can go into your house without showing you the search warrant and what they're there to look for. Go into your house without you even being home. Go through your home, search through your personal, violate your Fourth Amendment rights to privacy, violate your Fifth Amendment rights to private property, because they can also seize that property and take it with them. And by the way, if you weren't home when they came, and they could bust into your house, do all this searching, leave your home, close the door, and never have to tell you that they were there. And so that's a major violation of the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution. And so it would repeal that. It would repeal the nationwide search warrant, where in essence, ultimately you could go to Guam to search and get a judge to give you permission to search my house in Star, Idaho. So we've lost that geographic discipline that we've normally required in the issue of search warrants, because a local judge would understand that there are certain norms, there's certain practices and values that you have. And so the responsibility of that judge constitutionally was to shine that bright constitutional light into those dark shadows of probable cause, to say to the law enforcement community, you haven't provided me with sufficient probable cause to violate this, to take away the most precious right of private property, of the right to be secure. And then it would also take away the gag order provisions, that where if they walked into the library, they could tell the librarian, you cannot tell this person that we've requested their files. And in some cases, if they came and seized some of my records, I wouldn't even be allowed to call my attorney and say, hey, is it legal for them to do this? They can do the same thing at your bank. They could go to your bank and say, if you've taken out more than 25% of your bank account or a certain amount of money, and I'm not exactly sure what that is, that bank has to notify the FBI under the Patriot Act that you've taken out 25% and here's what you've done with the money. Then you have to tell them what you've done with the money. So those are probably some of the most egregious and obvious ones. And quite frankly, Tony, the ones that are going to be the easiest to repeal, because those are the ones that people feel the most violated on right now.
I've got to go back to Janelle, but just one other quick point is I do believe the law sunsets if it is not at one point. Is that not correct?
In 2005.
Yes.
But I don't really believe that you can put freedom on a sunrise and a sunset schedule.
Right.
I think you're born with that freedom, that's your birthright, that's your God-given right, I believe. And my freedom doesn't come from my government, so my government ought not be able to take it away from me. My
For
freedom,
even a period of time.
That's right.
And one final point is that, also, of course, since this is an ordinary statute, also the courts could also at some point declare it or provisions of it unconstitutional.
Yes, they could.
Janelle Burke.
Well, we could talk all the half hour about that particular subject, but I know our viewers want to hear about some other things. During the year, there was a prescription drug coverage bill enacted, and what was your position with regard to that bill, and do you think there are going to be amendments to that bill?
Janelle, I think it was a bad bill, and generally speaking, I think it was a bad bill because it raised expectations of what's going to happen as a result of that bill so high. Everybody's going to be disappointed. I think it put at danger those people, the 70% of the people over the age of 65, the retirees, that have already taken care of themselves, either through their company plan, the company that they worked for all their life, or they had protection through insurance that they've had all their life to supply them a lower cost pharmaceutical benefit that they've needed. So I think those 70% we have put, to some degree, we have put at risk, because now if the government's doing all this, some of these companies are going to say, well, if the government's providing this for you, what's the need for us to provide it for you? It's no longer going to be an incentive to work on for a long period of time for the company. It's a $400 billion benefit package that we did not pay for. We could have raised just the tax on Medicare 0.9 of a cent and paid, and that would have brought us in $42 billion a year, and we needed $40 billion a year to pay for it. I think the best time to pay for a benefit is when you're giving it. I'm a user pay guy. I don't mind paying gasoline taxes if I know that money's going to go to lay asphalt and build new bridges and provide a better transportation system. And so, but I also don't like borrowing from the next generation in order to satisfy some of the needs that I may feel are necessary for this generation. We were legislating for the next election instead of the next generation. And the result is it's going to cost the next generation. But to answer your question, I ended up voting for it because I knew we had what we refer to as Hillary Care Phase 1 waiting in the wings. That was $720 billion. It didn't have any of the reforms in it. And quite frankly, there is a part of this Medicare package that I really did agree with. It allows families to get back involved in the business of taking care of families. An example, both my grandmothers on my paternal and maternal side, both of my grandmothers came and lived with my mother and father and my 9 brothers and sisters and myself after my grandfathers died, because we recognized that as a family responsibility. We have so disincentivized the family to recognize that as part of their responsibility. The government has bid away the attention and the responsibility for that. Under these medical savings accounts, you're going to be allowed to put away a certain amount, $2,000 a year, and that will go on forever. So you start that as a young person, and by the time you're 50 or 60 years old, you'll have a sizable chunk of dough in that pot to be able to take care of yourself, medically speaking. The $2,000 is tax-free going in, the earnings on it is tax-free, and it's tax-free coming out so long as you're spending it on medical needs. So there's some good things with it, but I eventually voted for it, most reluctantly.
Erna Reinhardt.
Interesting. I'm learning a lot. One of the things that was passed just before the holiday break, Congressman, was the Healthy Forest Bill. Mm-hmm. And for those of us that live in the West, that's a very crucial bill. It deals with catastrophic fire. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, the Healthy Forest Bill, I view the Healthy Forest Bill as a very positive aspect from the standpoint of us being able to create not only a healthy forest, but our forest in the West is also our watershed. So that's our clean water. That's our opportunity to maintain a clean water, an effort to, and an environment for clean water. It's also habitat for some of our large game, which is also part of our economy, certainly part of our recreation and part of our heritage. So the Healthy Forest Initiative is more than just what some people would have you believe, that we're going to go in and we're going to cut down all the forest. It's meant to stop catastrophic wildfire, as we have seen, because for hundreds of years, or 100 years, we have suppressed all kind of wildfire. And wildfire is a very necessary part of forest management. They used to let fires burn. In fact, they used to use fire as a healthy management. So I think it's going to allow us to go in and thin the forest so that it's not overloaded. It's going to allow us to go in and remove some of the lower brush, which has allowed the ladder effect on a fire. If you've got a good, healthy forest that's fairly clean in the base, the fire will burn, and it'll burn through very fast, and it burns up the bugs, burns up insects, it burns up some of the diseases. It can eradicate some of the diseases. So fire is not altogether bad, but fire on an overgrown forest is bad. Now, I would say that there's one other problem with that, and that is this. During the last 10 years in my district alone in Idaho, we've shut down 32 lumber mills. All that capital structure has been shut down for quite some time. If they hasn't been cut off at the girders and shipped to South America, where they had material that could be run through, and you could make plywood, and you could make dimensional lumber, and you could make other wood products, that's where those mills were shipped to. But for the mills that were left here, they've been sitting idle without any investment. So technologically, they're behind quite a little bit. So we're going to have to figure out a scheme as we come up with this Forest Health Initiative, and we start bringing some materials out of our forest. We haven't the capital structure left in place anymore to manufacture the necessary wood products or marketable items out of this. So we're going to have to come up with a scheme to encourage reinvestment in new mills, which will then be new jobs and new job stations in the state.
I do need to tell our viewers that we're taping this program in the middle of January. It'll air in February, so there could be some developments during that time, and so we want to make that clear. President Bush recently announced here in January a proposal dealing with immigration and dealing with work permits and so forth. Would you share with us your view on this proposal?
Well, Tony, there's plenty of there are legal ways to immigrate to the United States and become a United States citizen, or to become a participant in the United States economy. And at first blush, at least the parts of the bill that I have become familiar with, I'm concerned that we're actually rewarding illegal activities. We know that we've got somewhere between 8 to 10 million people in the United States that are illegally from foreign countries. And so I think it's an affront to every person that went through the legal process, respected our laws, and are now in as part of the economy and working at a job. And so I do not want to reward that kind of illegal activity, and am adamantly opposed to any kind of creating a legal status for people that came in illegally.
You have your ear to the ground in the Congress, and so you know how they act on things, and you certainly surprised lots of people with your bill dealing with the Patriot Act when it passed with over 300 votes in the House. So with that knowledge of how members of the Congress in both parties operate, what do you think are the chances of this proposal in Congress?
Well, let me divide this thing up for you. Let me put on my whip hat,
okay,
because I'm on the whip team.
Sure, you are on the wheel.
I think that there are sufficient numbers of people that think that this is way, way too flexible and way too lenient. And part of our problems that we've got, in fact, in the month of December, everybody was surprised in the administration that we had only created 1,000 jobs. Well, I'm telling you that we probably created a lot more of that, but a lot of those jobs are underground economy jobs in the United States held by illegal people. Illegal entrance to the state, to the United States. So if it were a requirement that they came legally, those jobs would be in the overground or on the ground economy, and we probably would have created a lot more jobs. But my feeling is this: there are probably sufficient numbers of conservatives that don't want to see that kind of lenient attitude toward our immigration policy. There's probably a sufficient number of people way on the other side of the spectrum that would say this isn't lenient enough. And so adding up those two, I suspect that there's going to be adequate numbers to stop that kind of legislation.
Thank you. Janelle Burke.
There are many interesting questions, but one of the things that's happened since we last talked, and I think we should tell our viewers that you've been here before, and we appreciate your coming, is the Homeland Security Act and the whole process. There is a color-coded way of telling people what the danger is, which has come under some criticism lately because people may not know exactly what it means. It may not be the same for all parts of the country. Do you have a position on that, and how do you feel Homeland Security is working?
Well, being in an ex-military, I was always aware that we had 4 levels of alert for the military, and I'm not sure that they're any more correct or any more informative than this color coding is. I'm not sure what the answer is for that. But I think it's important that whenever the government, whenever Homeland Security becomes aware of any potential activity, we at least be alerted to that potential activity. And I think that we have, at the federal level, we have so overwhelmed the states with certain requirements that we've debilitated them in their own abilities to respond to this. I think we need a much larger role for the state, the first responders, the cities, the counties, to say to themselves, maybe we don't need to go on full alert here in this section of the state or in this section of the United States. Because we're not as vulnerable as other areas, and let's not debilitate these states from being able to save money where they can, and maybe sometimes they'll want to say, hey, we need to go on alert. But I really believe that the federal government's overwhelming attitude toward this is that you're going to take all of your signals from us, and I think if there's some time at the state level. Where the state says, I don't think we need to spend that extra money, and we don't need to go to that alert. We don't need to inconvenience people to the extent that we have. I think the state at least ought to have some say-so in that. Maybe instead of going from red to orange, we ought to be allowed to go to pink or, chartreuse or something like that.
Congressman, we're just running out of time, and we have about 20 seconds left. I'm going to ask our staff to put up your website, and I believe your phone number's there. And you do have 4 offices in Idaho,
yes.
I believe, one in Coeur d'Alene, one in Lewiston, and one in Napa, and one in Boise.
That's right.
People can reach you, and of course, it's up on the screen now. And your staff's available. You have about 15 staff to provide this service. And
yes, that's the total. That's total United States. That includes
right.
all those in Washington,
Right.
D.C., plus out here. And for the workload that we do, and we were talking earlier, I have a tremendous staff. And I must tell you, I get all the accolades or sometimes the blame. But really, I could not do it. And I don't think any congressman or senator could do it without their staffs.
On that note, we have to bring the conclusion. Congressman Butch Otter, it's a pleasure having you here. We've known you for many years, and you're very accessible, and we thank you for all the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Congressman C.L. Butch Otter, the 1st Congressional District Representative to the United States House of Representatives, and we'd like to invite you to be with us again next week at this same time when we shall discuss another issue. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Good show.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.